Poetry about woman's inner life is privileged to write about and explore a particular woman's inner life and imagination because she comes from a very well-to-do family. And she can be a cherished, cared for recluse whose private thoughts are valued and extolled. Whereas Louisa May Alcott has to go out and work for a living and support her family and is involved in very public events like the anti-slavery cause and women's rights and the rights of the poor.
In a sense, Dickinson imprisoned herself in her room. She became, after about 1860, when she was 30 years old, she became a completely determined recluse. I think that probably she suffered from what we now call agoraphobia, fear of public spaces. So, as she herself put it, she never crossed her father's ground to any house in town, and she made very few exceptions to that rule. She also very rarely saw visitors. Most of the time she spent in her room writing or in the kitchen with her sister cooking. Sometimes she climbed to a sort of belfry at the top of the homestead and looked out at the surrounding countryside, so that she did have a sense of prospect.
But Emily Dickinson didn't just hide herself away from society. This is Emily Dickinson's bureau, housed at Houghton Library, Harvard. It was in this bureau that Emily Dickinson hid most of her poetry during her lifetime. After her death, some 700 to 800 poems and letters tied up in bundles were discovered by her sister Lavinia, pictured here with Emily and their brother Austin. Lavinia sent the poetry off to a female friend and editor, and many collections have since been published.
Dickinson's poems look very different from other poetry of the time. They're written in lines that are joined together not with conventional punctuation, but with dashes. Looking at these poems from the perspective of women's culture, they look like quilts. They are lines, impressions that are joined together by these dashes that look so much like stitches. And Dickinson herself, when she assembled the poems into little booklets that she called fascicles, actually stitched them together. So there's a tremendous sense when you look at them that she is reflecting both her own culture and the literary culture that she had learned in her father's library.
Emily Dickinson's unconventionality was her hallmark. Yet when the first collection was published after her death, the poems were given titles and otherwise altered to standard form. It had been to avoid these sorts of changes that she had hidden her poems in the first place. In 1955, her poems were all republished in the form she had intended. The poem's success was one of the rare exceptions, published while Dickinson was alive, though anonymously. In the same volume is the poem Transfiguration, now known to be by Louisa May Alcott. This joint publication might be evidence that the two writers knew of each other's work. Despite their very different social backgrounds, Dickinson and Alcott shared two central concerns: the importance of space for writing and a developing sense of self-identity as women writers. But for Alcott, what was that identity? A resurgence of interest in the writing of Louisa May Alcott was led by the meticulous detective work of two women, Madeline Stern and Leona Rostenberg, literary scholars and dealers in rare books. Madeline Stern is Louisa Alcott's biographer and editor. In the 1970s, attention to women's writing brought to light fascinating research carried out by Stern and Rostenberg some 30 years earlier, when they had unmasked Louisa May Alcott as the writer of sensation stories. But how did they find this extra body of work?
Well, there are many clues, and some of them are embedded right in Little Women. As a matter of fact, she was asked later in life what was true about Little Women, what was not fictional about the book. And she named a number of things, including Jo March's literary experiences.
Jo March was a writer of lurid stories published in sensational weekly magazines.
The writer, Jo March, has had a prize-winning story published in the Blarney Stone Banner. Now she leaves samples of her work with Mr. Dashwood of the Weekly Volcano. The results of this transaction are also reported in Little Women. Her rubbish turned into comforts for all the family. The Duke's daughter paid the butcher's bill. A phantom hand put down a new carpet, and the curse of the Coventrys proved the blessing of the Marches in the way of groceries and gowns. If, indeed, Jo March's literary experiences were factual, then Louisa Alcott experienced all this.
Wrote a little on poor old work, but being tired of novels, I soon dropped it and fell back on rubbishy tales, for they pay best. And I can't afford to starve on praise when sensation stories are written in half the time and keep the family cozy.
So the money to pay for improvements at Orchard House did not just come from Little Women. Alcott's journals, originally edited by family friend Edna Dow Cheney, did provide evidence that she had indeed written sensation stories and had them published, by more than one publisher, and probably anonymously, or under a pseudonym. But where were the stories? Alcott's own way of referring to her tales, and 19th century editing methods of abbreviating names to initials made them difficult to identify. In their search, Stern and Rostenberg visited Harvard and Houghton Library, home to Dickinson's papers and artifacts, but also to a large collection of Alcott material. They wanted to refer to Alcott's original papers. Leona picks up their story.
There were many piles of letters and manuscripts, etc. And I sat over here to the left of Maddie, and she sat here, and she said, pick up some of the material in that box. And I picked it up, and she'd said, be on the alert for those pseudonyms. And I almost collapsed, because there was a small cache of letters addressed to dear Miss Alcott, written by James R. Eliot, and I let out a war whoop within the sacred precincts of Houghton Library. I said, here it all is, it's here. Well, of course, we were terribly excited, and Mound said, copy everything down, copy it down. And I copied the letters, and that was that.
On January 21st, 1865, Eliot wrote the following. You may send me anything in either the sketch or novelette line that you do not wish to father, or that you wish A.M. Barnard or any other man to be responsible for, and if they suit me, I will purchase them. The fifth and last letter found.
Also have in common that they are all, in a sense, about the terrible tension in women's lives between what they are allowed to do and what they are expected to be and what they feel and want to do. Their desire to be real people, to realize their true selves, and their equally strong desire to be loved and accepted by a world which doesn't want to let them do what they want to do.
First week, first day, 9 o'clock. Breakfast, preferably to be taken in bed, 10 o'clock. Time may be spent sewing, providing that the work is of an undemanding and repetitive nature. No letter writing. 11:30.
In The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, the heroine is an intelligent young woman suffering from a nervous illness, probably associated with postnatal depression. The treatment of the day was total rest and confinement.
2 o'clock, rest in a darkened room, no reading of any kind.
The daily routine took no account of her own desire for an active life.
Don't look as if you've been ambushed, Charlotte. There's nothing there to surprise you. We spelled it all out before we left London.
Yes, you did.
Stark assured me this was the right thing for you. I agreed with him, and so did you.
Your silence, consent.
The heroine is forced to read and write in secret.
Perfect place for a writer. Which is a curious irony, as John's brought me here to rest. I am forbidden to write a syllable. Sometimes I feel that my writing is regarded as little better than an unhealthy addiction. I cannot deny that I become so deeply absorbed in my work that occasionally I grow tired and lose enthusiasm for my other responsibilities.
Eventually denied even this outlet for her creativity, she begins to see shapes in the yellow wallpaper. By the end of the story, the heroine has ripped away the wallpaper to release a female figure. Perhaps a mirror image of her stifled creativity. Her resurrected imagination.